So a lot of it involves stopping things, but we now have a big opportunity to inject something affirmative in there. The president opened the door for us. The president has motivated me to run a new piece of legislation. I haven't decided all the details of it yet, but I think that when he suspended the application of the employer mandate, he did something that absolutely necessitates a prompt response on the part of conservatives in Congress. In fact, of all rule of law believing members of Congress of either party and of every political persuasion.
Yes.
He lacks the power to just amend Obamacare. He can't just amend it. And what he's doing isn't authorized by the text of the statute.
Right.
So he's breaking the law that he pushed through as his signature legislative accomplishment.
Sure.
If he wants that changed, he's got to come back and negotiate with us. And so my idea is to run legislation that would take into account the fact that he wants to do that. And there are a number of things that I'm working on. I mean, first of all, I still think full repeal is what we need. And I also think that in addition to continuing to push for full repeal, we need to refuse to fund, we need to refuse to pass any funding mechanism, continuing resolution or otherwise, that funds the ongoing operations of government unless that mechanism strips out Obamacare implementation and enforcement funding. So I think that needs to be our next big legislative push, is to fight to make sure that the next continuing resolution, if any, contains that restriction.
Can I ask, based on that question, if you're going to restrict to CR funding of Obamacare, is it going to be based on legislation that Obama has to come back with, or the Democrats have to come back with a new piece of legislation removing the employer mandate until they find a way to make it work?
Well, kind of, but this would have to suspend everything.
Right.
It would need to suspend not only to suspend and defund not just the employer mandate, but also the individual mandate and all the other provisions that go along with it to deal with the setup of the exchanges. If they're not ready to do one part of this, the whole thing was designed to work as a cohesive whole. That's why all these provisions are set to kick in together on January 1st of 2014. You can't have it occur without that balance, without that symmetry. And so if one of these things isn't going to kick in, none of them can.
Right, well, the employer mandate not kicking in means massive dumps on the exchanges.
Right, right. And look, this lumps the progressives who back this thing in the same camp as the caricature they've painted of us. It painted conservatives as these heartless friends of corporate fat cats. And yet they've just demonstrated that this is exactly what they are. They're willing to say, okay, yeah, we're going to fine, we're going to penalize individuals who don't comply with this law, but we're going to lift that completely when it comes to corporations. And I think that's unconscionable. And I don't think they're going to get away with it. And I think this is how we win. They have sown the seeds for what will eventually become the full repeal of Obamacare. Because the American people are not going to live with this thing. It's bad. The more they learn about it, the less they like it.
Do you find that the tide of the public is turning in conservatives' favor, not necessarily because they're conservatives, but because they're standing up for the people?
Yes, it's definitely turning in favor of conservatives because people are starting to realize that conservatives are the only ones out there standing for the common, hardworking American. Mm-hmm. It's not so. A lot of countries around the world have elites who prosper and do just fine. But the reason that the United States has a strong middle class is because we've historically been a pretty conservative nation. Mm-hmm. But we risk that. The more we lean toward having a big, centralized progressive government at the national level. Mm-hmm.